Welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Rana, and thank you for tuning in on St. Patrick's Day. Highly appropriate, and I'm even in green. Today, in addition to being St. Patrick's Day, is the first day of the testing window for students of Connecticut schools. In New London, grades 5 and 8 are starting the CMTs in science, and the SBAC test is going to be starting soon. And today is the first day statewide that school districts can give that. So as a result, in celebration of St. Patrick's Day and testing, the show is going to be about testing. And my guests today are Helen Sandalls and Jason Morris. And both of them are both very familiar faces at Board of Ed meetings and also members of Republic Ed, which I am a member of also, full disclosure. So welcome, Helen and Jason. And
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for coming on, and it's really timely. We were all tested when we were in school years ago. So what was that like, and what was testing like then, and what's happened to it?
Well, I mean, even when I was an adult as a teacher, it was still the same, which is that you have your curriculum, what you want to teach, and as a teacher, you sort of know what is exciting to students that you're teaching, and you teach it to them, and then at the end of that, you test to see if they've learned it, and if you need to go over anything before you move on to something that is going to be built on top of that. So the testing reflects what the curriculum is in that direction. More modern is doing some pre-tests and then post-tests to see if they've gone from zip to
something.
Something, yes.
In a more general sense, due to federal laws, since No Child Left Behind, the teachers used to teach what they taught, or test for what they taught, but now they teach for what's on the test.
So things have kind of gotten flipped around. It used to be that curriculum and content really came first, and the tests were very tied with what the teacher was teaching.
And that's a good point, too, because the tests weren't going to be the same. I mean, depending on what the curriculum was, you might be testing kids orally. You might be testing them with maps. You might be testing them in a huge number of ways.
They might be doing presentations.
They might be doing, exactly. I taught German, and I would have kids get up and give talks about anything that they wanted, like the stuffing dead squirrels that they found in the street.
As long as it was in German.
Exactly, and the kids would raise their hands, and there would be dialogue. And so that's not necessarily different, but it is definitely different from what No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top are doing and superimposing on ours. And then, as Jason says, they're saying, this is on the test, you have to teach what's on the test.
And before we talk a little bit about extensively about how it changed, so as a former teacher, how were the test results used? Like what you learned from the assessment, how would a classroom teacher use that information back then?
Well, you would know who needed help. You might meet with the students after school. You might meet with the parents and say, she's not doing her homework. And so that you keep kids together throughout the year. You don't want to lose kids by allowing them to fall behind. So you
could just kind of keep track and then about a dozen years ago we got No Child Left Behind, and I do have a slide, and I don't want to read it, but I want to show it briefly because it talks about testing and accountability, and this is a very, very different point of view. It has nothing to do with kids learning.
Right, so it changes it so greatly to where you may have maybe a dozen or a little bit more states that actually gave standardized testing as a state to to measure how they were doing. But then No Child Left Behind said that every single state will test 3 through 8, and then once in high school. And what they were saying is that they're changing the belief into an unproven one that says, if we test children and make teachers accountable for improving those test scores, that all kids would be at this level by 2014. And it wasn't even an accomplishable goal. There's no way they were able to accomplish that.
And at no point does it really even state that its goal is to help a teacher gauge which students need help.
Right, and the testing window ends in mid-June, mid to late June, and the results come out a month after that. So kids are in summer school when the results come out. You're not actually going to use those tests.
Well, it's definitely after the year is ended, even if they're taking them in March. And
It
a
takes-
lot of places, they don't get them until August. And so it's a new teacher.
Even if you get
it's
them
a new
last week.
curriculum.
Yeah.
And they say that the teacher that then gets the scores of the incoming class is given no detail, doesn't know anything about the child other than this score. And we can get into the scoring, which is basically 70% of the kids are below what's called proficient. And that's how the tests are structured, so that 70% basically flunk. And
What you
so
mean by structured is that they set the cut score to an arbitrary number. And they actually used the results of SAT scores from around the country to show, okay, about what level will these students pass or fail. And so how difficult do we need to make it to where this amount of kids are most likely to fail and how many are likely to pass. And this year they predict that 7 out of 10 students in Connecticut are going to not be scoring proficient, or
But it's almost an arbitrary.
The word, they took it from the NAEP, which is the National Assessment Test that's been going on for a very long time.
Decades.
And it was just they only did it for sampling. It was a federal test that they would do maybe geographically so that they could see how kids and what kids were learning around the country, and then they could compare it with other countries. But it never contemplated that every single child in the country would take it every single year, because you don't need that kind of information. You just need to know sort of how are kids doing in the Northeast, and what are they learning here and what are they learning there. And then people could make decisions about curriculum. And it was not proscriptive. It did not say, they weren't telling people you've got to be teaching this. They were just seeing what was being taught and learned.
And it would be nice to point out that according to these comparisons, Connecticut always had an excellently rated school system.
Right,
One of the
right.
So we should all recognize
And that's
that.
what's terrific about what Jason was saying, is that when these tests started being given, just about every state in the nation, the scores, because it's these two companies that are doing it collaboratively, dropped everybody's scores about 30%. And the parents rose up in many states, and
This is a
well, that's-
recent Common Core version of testing.
Yes.
So our state has the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium, so the SBAC, and then the other states have PARC, and I actually don't remember that off the top of my head. But we're actually in the minority when it comes to the SBAC. There's fewer states doing this than there is the other, because we have a company called AIR that's making the test proprietary, and the PARC is with Pearson.
actually, do you have a question you want to ask? I was going to say, where did this come from? That we went from old-fashioned testing or assessing the students, to suddenly we're doing this crazy thing of testing everybody every year with a standardized test. And what happened, as you mentioned, 2002, there was this sense, because it was being actually touted by certain people, that American education was broken. and that the rest of the world was way ahead of us, and that we needed to embark on this whole new thing, which was No Child Left Behind, and then ultimately Race to the Top. And so that's why they said, okay, by 2014, we're going to make sure that 100% of the kids in the United States are proficient, which is now, as we know, an unachievable
And it's
thing.
2015 now.
And it is. And so what happened, and then they said if a whole school didn't have 100% of its students proficient on these standardized tests, then they would sanction the school, and depending on how off it was, their scores, they would fire the teachers and they would close the school. And what's happened in the last 12 years is that this goal of proficiency at 100% or even way below that isn't anywhere close, anywhere, not a single state. But lots and lots of schools have been closed. And
Lots of new charters.
and they are replaced. We're talking about public schools here.
Right.
I'm sorry, so we haven't said that. We're talking about only public schools. Only public school students need to take these standardized tests. And so we're shutting down hundreds and hundreds of public schools, hundreds and hundreds just in Chicago, just in Washington, D.C.
Philadelphia has also
and
been
New Orleans, and just all of the public schools in New Orleans. So, and oddly, these public schools that were shut down were minority and poor schools, inner city schools by and large. And amazingly, the kids in affluent communities didn't get shut down.
And of course,
even though they
private
didn't meet
school kids
they don't
who
have to
are
do it.
the offspring of congressmen, for example.
Yes, right.
But, and I wanted to just, you sort of pointed out, and I have a slide that also we don't have to go into any detail, but Race to the Top actually added a little bit of a competitive edge
Right.
to
And
what was started
money.
with No Child Left Behind.
Yeah.
Yes, money, but also you can see that, and I didn't include any of these criteria, how to judge great teachers or how to judge the assessments, but it becomes very clear that low achieving schools are going to be punished, they're going to be closed or restructured, and that these tests, once again, we've come one step farther away from using tests to actually help kids learning.
So, all right, so 2002, we're broken, we need this draconian solution. Only it turns out, the amazing thing is that we weren't broken, nobody had bothered to do any research, and we now know that in 2002 and 2001, test scores that, standardized test scores that were being given and so on, were the highest they had ever been. In other words, we weren't like that. We had been going up, and they were the highest in the U.S. history for whites, for African Americans, for Latinos, for Asians. Second, the graduation rates for all of these groups were the highest in American history.
And they still are
And,
today.
and they
Keep
still
going up.
are, yes, and it has gone up. And third, the dropout rate was the lowest in history. And this comes from a recognized education historian who has served in the Department of Education under the first President Bush. And so it was sort of all based on a hoax, and then you've got now this standardized testing, which is not, well, are we getting there yet? In terms of, is it really assessing kids? Is it really doing anything for their education? And what we're seeing is that, in fact, the data is showing that the achievement gap or learning gap or education gap between minority or primarily poor versus affluent has been widened by the standardized testing.
Well, as you talk, it occurs to me that our economy it has a widening gap as well. At the end of the Clinton administration, the economy was relatively good.
Yes.
And then it went crash in the early 2000s. So I can't help but wonder whether the widening education gap might have something to do with the different emphasis of education, but also that we're not dealing with the other factors.
Well, yeah, when it comes to the reason why children have such large disparities in their achievement, measured in more than just test scores, is from, instead of an achievement gap, but an opportunity gap. When you have a higher household income, you have more ability to do extracurricular activities, have more books, specifically books. You eat better, you sleep better, you go out and do things. You have your first years are so much more enriched in comparison to.
Yeah, you're much more likely to be have access to outdoors, grass, trees. Yeah.
Right, instead
Less
of
big difference.
Less trauma,
Yeah.
which is
definitely less trauma.
a big issue.
Which comes with
and more
poverty.
stability, and which is another disadvantage for kids in poor circumstances. So another thing we've seen, though, is that, first of all, I guess, does it properly or really assess kids or their learning? And what it does correlate to, high scores, as we've said, correlates to family wealth and opportunity. But there have been some cheating among the states. The kids aren't cheating, which is what we're used to hearing. Oh, kids are cheating. But in fact, the states, some states have lowered their pass rate so that they could say, without telling anybody, so they can say, look at, we're doing so much better now, and more kids are passing, because the first year everybody did so poorly.
And here in Connecticut, we use a different method, which
is to take.
Yeah, so in Hartford, what they did, instead of just changing the cut score, superintendent at the time, Stephen Adamowski, shifted lower scoring children into special education programs, and took them off of the CMTs at the time. So when you take away your lower scoring group so drastically in numbers, your average scores go up. And current Hartford board member Robert Cotto Jr., he calls it addition through subtraction, and he has a CT Voices for Children report just on that entire situation. And because other districts in our state that are having trouble with test scores didn't do it as drastically as them, they get the punishment of reform and highlighting, and you are a turnaround district.
Yeah, it seems to me that as soon as you set up this atmosphere that there's competition among the schools for dollars and for status and for autonomy, you're inviting people to try to game the system. And I know the New London Science and Technology Magnet High School has a very good reputation. I'm not trying to put it down at all, but it was explicitly designed partly to bring wealthier kids into the New London pool of students. And then after Winthrop Magnet School opened, I heard from someone, and I don't know if this is reliable or not, that Groton was advising parents of lower achieving students to send those students to Winthrop. Now, none of this
just
really
to get them out of their population,
so
demographic.
you get this gaming of the system, and none of which really says, these are the students we have, how can we help them learn and blossom to the best way possible?
The other thing that I think we've talked about a lot and seen a lot of data on is how damaging I guess you could either say the assessment that we now have, the standardized testing, or test-driven education reform, which is sort of really what it is. And it damages not only the kids who are being told, who are poor and have little access to amenities that might allow them to succeed. Even high-achieving or high-scoring kids who are from affluent families are being deprived now of the full spectrum of a good curriculum because the teachers, because as you say, the stakes are so high, the money is only there if you can somehow raise your scores. It's impossible to raise your scores, and the teachers are going to lose their jobs, and then we might close down the school. And so, since only math and reading are tested by these federally required standardized tests, and it's every year, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grades, they lose the arts, history, civics, literature, geography, science, PE, arts, including music, and they don't count in the test, and so they have fallen by the wayside. Not everywhere, obviously, but
it is creeping up. The the loss of extracurricular activities, or say electives even, and just the things that school districts need to keep up with the times, it's creeping up into the districts that may be considered more affluent, but they may not be, way up there. Where we have like the high end of the spending spectrum in our Connecticut was $24,000 per child in a district, 24,000. But here in New London we have 14,000-ish in New London.
Now we have a video that shows that some parents are,
That's great.
well, I think I have to click it.
I was thinking.
Okay.
Let's, and hopefully this will play.
I see you probably practiced this.
I did. I did practice it.
Well, one of
But it
the
might,
So far, so good.
well, I'm hoping it'll show up.
things we haven't talked about, and maybe you cut me off when it
Click the arrow.
starts,
No,
but
sorry, not you.
I know
Yeah. We'll see if that,
is how we know how kids learn. Kids learn if they're
Does anything happen there?
excited about things, and kids are excited about learning new things, and so and when you do instruction in a lot of different ways, outdoors, indoors, exchange, small group, large group projects, experiential learning, things like that. In general, that I gather is not so much how, is that, no?
well, we'll work on it.
Okay.
It was working at my house.
I know.
So you can
Okay, so we
continue.
can
We
put
can
our
talk
finger
while,
there, okay.
Yeah, you really got to reach kids with what they're interested in,
Right.
And connect it to their experiences, their culture, their community. There's going to be some things that are dry and sometimes uninteresting, but for the most part, teachers are amazing. Well, all the time, teachers are amazing at doing the best they can to reach the kids. And,
Each kid,
right?
too,
Right.
and
Each kid in
finding
different ways.
the hook for each kid.
And when
that
you
they love.
have to teach to these high stakes tests that say if your test results don't go up, you may lose your job, or this school may be closed, or we'll turn this into a charter school. There won't be a union anymore, and you'll have to fight for you have to reapply to get your job. That's what the test scores are pressuring the teachers with, and that means they have to narrow their curriculum to be what's on the tests. And that they spend, I think it was they estimated 13 weeks on preparing and teaching and then actually testing the children.
Yeah. Well, we're going to ask for some technical assistance on our videos because I lost the PowerPoint, but it's mostly the videos.
The
So we
videos, I
will-
know.
And I do want to get to them. And
Yes.
if we get to them a little later on in the program, that's okay because it's about people pushing back. So I think it's not too early to start talking a little bit about what this is doing to teachers, to families,
Right.
and why people are
I was just
pushing
thinking
back.
that because what we haven't said yet is, I don't think, is that the tests that we're talking about, these standardized tests, every year, 3rd grade through 8th grade, are not just used for presumably assessing children and whether they are going to be competitive in the world market and stuff like that. They are used to evaluate or assess the teachers, and which is a really bizarre idea, which we'll get into, as well as the schools. So, yes, no?
No.
Okay.
No, not gonna happen.
Okay.
That's unfortunate.
Okay,
We did it
so
wrong.
if you teach in an affluent community anywhere, your kids' test scores are going to be pretty high, and so that's great. And if you teach in an inner city school, those kids, because the tests reflect nothing more than affluence, those kids are going to test low, and those teachers just automatically are going to get low scores as evaluations. There are better ways, there are actual ways, I should say, to evaluate how teaching is going on. And Diane Ravitch, the educational historian, as well as most people, say you have professional teachers, you have professional teachers who are supervising professional teachers, and teachers are professionally interacting with each other and getting ideas from each other about what works. And typically, yeah. And so, in an ordinary school in our day, there was a lot of cross-fertilization. There was a lot of excitement by the teachers, learning themselves, learning new ideas and trying out new stuff. And of course, working with the students and seeing them grow and accomplish things, and feeling that pride that kids have when they now know something they didn't used to know, or can do something they weren't able to do before.
You're not gonna get that movie. Media.
What about any?
Oh, the next one looks good.
Okay,
Yeah.
we could do that.
Well, the only one we have is the lawyer one, so that'll come.
Not the what it's testing for?
That one isn't working either. I don't know why
Oh.
not. Which is really unfortunate, because
We're just going to have to come back.
we are, and they all got imported exactly the same way, but some worked and some didn't. Oh, the joys of
Do you
PowerPoint.
think it's the Department of Education?
No. Well, the other ones, though, they started out very black,
Yeah.
but they didn't progress. But, so we talked about teachers, we talked about what happens with schools, especially in big cities. So there's starting to be some pushback. Parents that are seeing their kids are stressed out, whether they're good students or not so good students. Teachers who I'm sure are teaching under very stressful conditions. And I mean, imagine waiting till summer to find out what your students' test scores are looking like, to find out what your job evaluation's going to look like.
And not being able to do anything with those kids whose scores you know. No.
Well, and they start to use methods like teach to the middle, which is a method of teaching to the middle of the class, of their grade levels and such, so that you can try to keep an average and keep the tests as steady, hopefully improving as you can. Back to what we were saying about why parents are pushing back. It's because it's harming our kids. We have young citizens to the country that may not know English, and they come to our schools, English language learners, and within 10 months of English instruction, they are required to start taking these exams, and they're all in English. There is no Spanish, there is no French, there is no German, there is no other language of these
And our
tests.
school system in New London has probably about 30 home languages.
Right.
And I think 50%.
Over 80% are, excuse me, no, that's a different number. It's over 30%.
Over 50 are
Yeah, right.
second
Language.
language, English, second language, isn't it? Something like that, yes. I do get all those
Yeah.
numbers mixed up.
And it's all languages. I mean, it isn't just Spanish. We have a huge Haitian population here. We have a very large population from the Indian subcontinent, a lot of Albania, I've been told, but also, Pakistani, Bangladesh,
Sure,
India.
Tunisia, all over the place. It's hurting, so English language learners, it's hurting special education students who have to take the same test for whatever grade they're in, but they, as a student, and per their IEPs, they say that they're learning at maybe a grade level that's 2 below what the grade they're giving a test for, what they're taking a test for. And then that new test has been shown to be 1 to 2 grades above that level that they're taking it as, the new SBAC in Park.
And I hear that they're going to start with, down to kindergartners and subjecting them to it as well.
5-year-olds, yeah. There's several states that have already done it, and I gather from what I was reading that we now have adopted a test or legislated it in any event for 5-year-olds.
How they can say that sitting a 5-year-old in front of a computer to click around and do a multiple choice test is for their benefit is beyond me.
And actually, reading is getting pushed to ages lower and lower, even though there is zero data to show that kids who learn to read at 5 become better or love reading more than those who learn when they're 7 or 8.
There are kids who can
Sure.
read at 4, but just because that's true doesn't mean that every kid is like every other kid. In fact,
Right.
there's some
And-
argument to be made that they're different.
Right.
So, yeah. But we're also suspending kids who are under 8 and under 7.
True.
So,
That's a whole other-
to me, it's part of this. In other words, who are the kids that we suspend from schools?
Right.
And in Connecticut, as well as other places, but certainly in Connecticut, there are kids who are poor and minorities. And so if we have official actions where we keep them out of school for not knowing how to behave in school and not sort of teaching them how to behave,
Acting out from
right? I mean, they may have had a shooting in the family or being
they're working at a second job or
their
for the
parents,
family.
they're taking their younger sisters to someplace
Right. They're
before
late to
school.
school.
There are any number of reasons, but we have zero tolerance discipline policies where nobody wants to know why you were late or whether your
Right, you leave the
grandmother was
baggage at the
yes,
door,
right,
and it-
right.
And
So when you've got that situation where there's an increased official, what can you call it? I mean, we're not exactly going all out to make sure that everybody has the same opportunity to learn. And we're making it harder on the very kids who have a hard time already and who need to be in school. And so then they have these tests and they're told, you're flunking. And they already feel like they're not wanted or part of it and so on. So we're in a really bad spiral on that.
And one of the very unfortunate things about the videos not working, and it was only about 2 or 3 minutes worth, but they were parents talking about their young children who were usually elementary school age, who used to love school, and then started, they'd see the test and they'd write that they were losers. And and there was even one parent who said, I have a PhD, and I looked at some of these sample tests and they just made no sense to me. A lot of the answers are ambiguous.
The questions
There's
are
a lot
unintelligible,
of technology. It isn't so much if a child understands math concepts. It might really depend on how good they are at maneuvering around a numeric keypad as well as a prerequisite.
or a mouse with highlighting, clicking, dragging.
Yeah, so there were all of these personal stories of about maybe half a dozen parents who saw that their children were really being harmed by this, so they decided to take action. And I think it's time, since we're not seeing this,
Yes.
to talk about what action parents can take.
Well, can I just throw in one more thing
Sure.
before the parents, and that is their parents are not alone. I mean, even the Department of Education found last year, the year before, that it was really inappropriate, even though it's part of their program, to use test scores to evaluate teachers because they found that there was an error rate of at least 25%.
That's
Also-
a big error rate.
It's pretty big, yeah. The other thing is that it is pretty much accepted by academics and people who learn how to be superintendents and principals and teachers, that what happens in a school has only about a 13% bearing on how a child does in school. That it is the external factors, and we keep talking about it, but we
Right.
can actually quantify it. So if you change the child's life, and it doesn't have to couch surf every night, living in a different place and having a lot of the stresses that they do when they're poor, and get their first book, maybe have 2 or 3 books, and can read for enjoyment
Right.
for the first time in their lives, and so on. You can have a huge impact on the child's success in school. Teachers control so little of the success of a child in school, and that's, people who are academics know that as well. 500, over 500 education researchers, they're called researchers, but when you look through the list, they're all professors at the universities in the United States. And they wrote last year an open letter, what am I saying, it was in February, to Obama administration and to Congress, saying basically, stop with this test-driven education reform because standardized tests. Oh no, this is Connecticut, and this happened yesterday. Here it is. Well, in any event, I can tell you, they a joint statement that it is dysfunctional, that it's harming children. So there's a lot of evidence about the harm. There was 500 seems to be the magic number, early childhood educators in 2012 that signed a joint statement also stating that the standards are developmentally inappropriate for children
Common Core
in the
standards.
early, and which are tested on these tests.
And then just 2 days ago?
Right.
Or yesterday?
Yesterday, the 12 Connecticut superintendents came
So it
out with
isn't
it.
just parents.
Right. I mean, their parents see their own kids. They see them hurting. They see them giving up on school and on themselves. And then 12 superintendents went on record urging the state legislature of Connecticut to ditch this testing
Transform, change.
because they think that it is inappropriate to be using these tests to evaluate kids, to evaluate the quality of a school or teachers. They say it's corrupted. The data is corrupted when misused for these purposes, and they disrupt authentic learning for long periods of time. So the parents know they're not nuts. They see it, and they're reading.
The teachers know it,
Right.
so many people know it. So what can parents do? And I wanted to apologize to the person who called before and we never picked up, but we can take phone calls for this last 15 minutes of the
Okay.
show.
So the idea is that there's a few ways. There's a singular and an almost selfish way of looking at it. I want to protect my child. I don't want my child to have to go through this test that's really worthless. It's going to harm the school in the end. Either way we
Sure.
go. whether it's a high-scoring kid or it's not. It gives data to the non-government organizations who want to say, hey, look at these schools that are failing, look at these schools that are doing better, and they're ranking us and they're comparing us and they're doing this competition, which is not healthy for in education. You have a call?
We do, but you can.
Okay.
We'll
you
take
go
the
ahead.
call. Hi, thank you for calling.
Hey, Rona, Dennis from New London.
Hi, Dennis.
This Common Core thing, I try to understand it. I try to go online, find out the pros and the cons. I'm finding more cons than pros. But I'm just curious with this is, now I've read somewhere where it's Common Core for math, English. What I'm thinking is, what about the other things in schools that kids go through there, whether it's sports, whether it's music, theater, all these kind of things. Does Common Core address any of that stuff?
No,
It actually pushes it out.
mostly.
Really?
Yeah, well, so the Common Core standards actually encompass just about just math and English right now. They're working on science next. So it doesn't say what your standards are in music or art or gym or anything else. And the reason they only have those is because that's how much Bill Gates gave them funding for in the beginning, and because the tests are were going to be, and now are aligned to just those two topics, those subjects. So they're working on science. That'll be next, and it's all just based on the tests.
And I'm guessing some things like art and music are harder to quantify, so they're less attractive targets for this kind of testing.
It's arguable to even say that you can quantify learning in many cases.
But the irony is, of course, that having music, performing music, having art, and learning art helps kids to learn other things.
Yes, and in fact,
yes.
math is famous for being benefited by music education.
Right, but you have to play an instrument. You can't just sit around and listen to CDs or MP3s. You have to play, and so it's developing your brain. And sports has the data on athletics and physical activity on a kid's ability to learn is phenomenal, and we know that. This is old news.
All right, another thing I was curious about, you guys talking about, is books. Now, I hear a lot of stories about there's less and less books. Kids aren't taking books home for homework anymore. They mimeograph off a piece of paper and say, here's your assignment for tonight. But to me, that takes away a lot of the responsibilities that a kid should have when they're in school. I mean, they're given a book and it's their property, and it's up to them to maintain it, to learn out of it. Now, when you get a piece of paper can end up anywhere and forgotten. Another thing I wanted to ask you guys about is, I hear a lot about the kids now getting, I guess they're called tablets or something in the classrooms.
The
Are
electronics.
those things set up so that they only have to do with classes, or can a kid go on Google or something with one of these things?
As a parent, you're very qualified to talk about.
Well, it's really
all
up to the
stuff.
district on what they do with the technology. So that they're giving, in a slow rollout, Google Chromebooks to our high school students. All the Science and Tech Magnet High School students already have them. The New London High School, they're still working on getting them out there. We have reports of they're giving to them, they're taking them away, they're all over the place. But yeah, they can be set up by the technology department to say, these are the restrictions, and they can put proxy servers in there so that they go through our school servers and then get filtered. But likely, if they're just connecting at home to the internet, it's just like any other computer. And it may have educational software on there, and it lets them keep their documents on there, and has the software they need in order to, complete their homework.
Okay, I'm going to actually cut in because we're down to about our last 7
All right,
minutes.
thanks. Great show tonight, Rona.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.
And I wanted us to really get to parents being able to opt out.
Absolutely.
And the how and the why.
Yes. Okay. First of all, you're not seeing
No,
a 38-second.
Actually, we'll
Show
try
that.
the 38 seconds.
This answers the question, do parents have a right to opt out their kids
No, that
from the
didn't
standard.
work. Let's
Okay,
try
do you
this.
want, I could just,
I'll try one more time. Technology is not our friend
there,
today.
look at, she's there.
She's there, but she's not moving.
Okay, all right, here's the deal.
No.
Can I go? Okay.
Go.
All right. The federal law and the state law both say, and this is across the states, that every child shall be tested with these standardized tests. They don't give any, not some children, or if they don't come to school, something. It's an absolute. So how does a parent have a right when it says that every child shall do this? And it comes from the United States Supreme Court. And that is, there have been at least 7 United States Supreme Court cases in the last, well, since 1922 or 3, that where the court has held that parents have a fundamental right to direct the care, nurture, and education of their children. So clearly, if a parent sees and believes reasonably from reading or otherwise that their child is going to be harmed by loss of learning time, or by the humiliation of failing when they work really hard and loved school before, and now just seeing nothing but failure and self-contempt, then they have a fundamental right to do something. Do you want to?
Yeah, the 14th Amendment forbids government to infringe upon the fundamental liberty interests of all, no matter what process is provided, unless the infringement is narrowly tailored to serve a compelling state interest. So, sure.
And what that means is, what that means is that the state and the government, federal government or the state government, have to be able to demonstrate that what they're doing actually works. Narrowly tailored means that it actually works to achieve the thing that it's trying to achieve, which we already know it doesn't, and that no other method would achieve this. In other words, you couldn't assess them, you couldn't teach them unless we had these standardized tests, and that's just not true.
Now that the window's open for testing, and if a parent wants to take action and opt out,
yes,
what should that parent do?
You still can. It's completely possible. You can do it, but way before, you can do it during, anytime you want. Now, just the window's open, it doesn't mean that we're actually testing now. They could be testing in a few days, who knows. But you can send an email. You could say, I refuse to let my child participate in practice and or the SBAC test for this iteration.
And that'll
set off a chain reaction.
I was going to ask, so what does a parent expect the response to be?
Intimidation and a pushback saying, I'm sorry, there's no way we can do that. There's nothing in the law that says that you can opt out. And then you say, I know the law, I understand the state says this. They say that the previous commissioner said there is no way of punishing any teacher, any school district, any parent, any child for not taking the test. And yes, there's no law that says you can't opt out, but the 14th Amendment and the parental right says that you can do that, and it's been successful all over the country.
And the child can't be punished, and the parent can't be punished.
Right. Although in Connecticut and many other places, the children have been punished, but it looks like this year the light has gone on, and I think there's some more understanding that they're going to have to give the children some alternative activity that's an educational, they can do homework and so on, and not sit and stare, which was the treatment that they got before. The other thing was that parents would say, I'm opting out, and so my child will be absent. And you don't really want to say my child will be absent, but my child is refusing to take the test, because then when the child came back to school, then they would say, oh, now you're not absent, now you have to take the test. So what you don't want to have to go through it again, or have your child go through it. And your child may be put in a position of saying, well, we're just going to make you sit with the other kids, and here's the test, and here's a pencil, and just, you know, train your kid. You're not doing it, and that's it.
That's the thing. You shouldn't have to train your own child. When you tell the district that you are refusing to allow your child, you're not giving the choice to the child anymore.
Right.
And you are protecting that child and all the others.
Okay, we have 1 minute.
Okay, ccsoptout.org. ccsoptout.org. They have 2 sample letters. Another place that's really good, and it's sort of everything you need to know about this, is CT Against Common Core. No punctuation. ctagainstcommoncore.org.
And so there is a lot of information
And they
out there.
have a sample letter, very good.
You can search for Opt-out CT on Facebook or
Right,
your group.
sample
help
opt-out
you?
letter, Connecticut parents.
Okay, and we have 20 seconds, so I'm going to invite people. On Friday night, there is going to be a movie at All Souls, 7 p.m., Ending the School to Prison Pipeline, Education, Not Incarceration. Not directly about testing, but about different ways that students, and very often students in cities, do get pushed out of the education that they have a right to. So we could have used another half hour, but thank you, Jason, and thank you, Helen.
Very welcome.
Thank you, Ronna.
And we'll be back, and if parents need any more information, it is out there, and people should not be afraid to protect their kids.
Right.
So thanks, and I hope we'll see you on Friday night.
Be there. We'll be there.